All right, folks, let's talk about the early 20th century. It was a time of immense change and upheaval, a period where the old world was giving way to the new. Picture Europe like a tinderbox ready to explode. The continent was a complex web of alliances and rivalries, each nation watching the other with a mix of suspicion and ambition. You've got this intense nationalism, right? Countries flexing their muscles, puffed up with pride. Leaders were making grand speeches, parades were showcasing military might, and everyone was eager to prove their dominance. Then you've got empires crumbling, new powers rising, and everyone's jockeying for position. The old guard was struggling to maintain control, while new nations were eager to carve out their place in the world. Add to that a history steeped in bloodshed, old grudges simmering like a pot about to boil over. Treaties and agreements were often just paper-thin promises, easily broken when convenient. You see, Europe had been relatively peaceful for decades, but beneath the surface, tensions were brewing, alliances were shifting, and the seeds of war were being sown. The peace was fragile, held together by a delicate balance of power. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand was just the spark. It was a shocking event that sent ripples through the political landscape, shaking the very foundations of stability. It ignited the fuse that had been laid carefully over decades of mistrust, ambition, and fear. Secret meetings, backdoor deals, and diplomatic discussions had all set the stage for a massive conflict. It was a powder keg waiting for a match, and man, did that match ever get lit. The world was plunged into a war that would change the course of history forever, a war born out of pride and paranoia. June 28, 1914, Sarajevo, Bosnia. A young Gavrilo Princip, Serbian nationalist, takes aim. His target? Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne. Bang! A shot rings out, echoing through history. The Archduke and his wife are dead. This wasn't just a crime, folks, it was an international incident of epic proportions. Austria-Hungary, furious, saw a chance to settle the score with Serbia. They issued an ultimatum, a list of demands so harsh, so deliberately unacceptable that it could only mean one thing: war. And the rest, as they say, is history. But to understand how we got to that fateful day in Sarajevo, we got to rewind a bit. See, Europe in the early 1900s was a tangled web of alliances, a complex network of treaties and agreements that bound nations together in a delicate balance of power. You had the Triple Alliance: Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy standing together, united by mutual interests and a shared sense of security. On the other side, you had the Triple Entente: France, Russia, and Great Britain, an alliance formed in response to the growing power of the Triple Alliance. These alliances were meant to be deterrents, a way to prevent any one nation from becoming too powerful and upsetting the balance. The idea was, if one country attacked, the others would jump in, creating a balance of power that would keep the peace. It was a strategy of mutual defense and collective security. But these alliances also meant that a conflict between two countries could quickly spiral out of control, dragging the rest of Europe into the abyss. The interconnectedness of these treaties made the continent a powder keg, ready to explode. And that's exactly what happened. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary set off a chain reaction. Austria-Hungary, backed by Germany, issued its ultimatum to Serbia, demanding harsh terms that were almost impossible to meet. Russia, feeling obligated to protect its Slavic brethren in Serbia, mobilized its troops, setting off alarms across Europe. Germany, fearing a two-front war against both Russia and France, declared war on Russia and then on France, its ally. The dominoes were falling. And just like that, the continent was at war. What started as a regional conflict had escalated into a full-scale war, engulfing all of Europe in a matter of weeks. The alliances that were meant to keep the peace had instead paved the way for one of the deadliest conflicts in human history. Now, we can't talk about World War I without talking about imperialism. See, all the major powers at the time were also colonial empires. They were competing for land, resources, and influence all over the world. This competition bred resentment, rivalry, and a whole lot of suspicion. The scramble for colonies created a climate of constant tension. Every diplomatic incident, every territorial dispute had the potential to escalate into something much, much bigger. So when the war finally did break out, it wasn't just about Serbia or Austria-Hungary. It was about decades of pent-up frustration, rivalry, and the desire for power on a global scale. Section 5, The Dominoes Fall, Declarations of War, August 1914. The dominoes start to fall. Germany, with its Schlieffen Plan, aimed for a swift knockout blow against France. They marched through neutral Belgium, triggering Great Britain's entry into the war. The Ottoman Empire, sensing an opportunity, joined the Central Powers. The world watched in disbelief as Europe, seemingly at the pinnacle of civilization, plunged into chaos. What began as a localized conflict had exploded into a global conflagration, a war that would reshape the political landscape of the world. Section 6. The Guns of August, A Continent at War. The initial stages of the war were marked by a sense of naive optimism. People talked about being home by Christmas, a belief that the war would be short and decisive. Oh boy, were they wrong. Instead, the war bogged down into a gruesome stalemate. On the Western Front, a vast network of trenches snaked across France and Belgium, becoming a muddy, bloody hellhole where millions would perish. The world had never seen anything like it. The Industrial Revolution, which had promised progress and prosperity, had been twisted into a monstrous engine of death. Section 7, The Western Front, a gruesome stalemate. Imagine, if you will, mile after mile of trenches, mud everywhere, rats the size of cats. And overhead, the constant thunder of artillery, turning the landscape into a moonscape of craters and barbed wire. This was the reality of the Western Front. New technologies like machine guns and poison gas made the fighting more lethal than ever before. Millions of men were fed into this meat grinder, sacrificing their lives for mere yards of mud. Battles like Verdun and the Somme became synonymous with unimaginable carnage, leaving scars on the landscape and the human psyche that endure to this day. Section 8. The Eastern Front, a different kind of war. While the Western Front was defined by trench warfare, the Eastern Front was a more fluid, mobile affair. Vast distances, harsh weather conditions, and the sheer scale of the conflict made for a different kind of war. Here, the Russian army, though massive, was often poorly equipped and undersupplied. They faced off against the Germans and Austro-Hungarians in a series of brutal battles that stretched from the Baltic Sea to the Black Sea. The Eastern Front was just as brutal, just as unforgiving as its Western counterpart, claiming millions of lives and leaving entire regions in ruins. Section 9, Global Conflict from Europe to the World. World War I wasn't just a European war, folks. It was a global conflict that drew in colonies and nations from around the world. Soldiers from Africa, Asia, and the Americas were pulled into the maelstrom, fighting and dying for causes far from home. From the beaches of Gallipoli to the plains of East Africa, the war raged on, shattering the illusion that this was just a European affair. The world was interconnected, and the consequences of this war would be felt far beyond the battlefields of Europe. Section 10, 1918, the Year of Attrition. As the war dragged on into its fourth year, both sides were exhausted. The constant fighting, the unimaginable losses, the deprivations on the home front, it all took a toll. But there was a new player on the field, the United States. Drawn into the conflict by German submarine warfare and the Zimmermann telegram, the arrival of fresh American troops tipped the balance in favor of the Allies. By the fall of 1918, the German war machine was spent. Mutinies broke out, revolutions simmered, and finally, on November 11, 1918, an armistice was signed. The guns fell silent. The Great War was over. Section 11, The Legacy of the Great War. The world that emerged from World War I was forever changed. The war had left deep scars on the landscape and the psyche of nations. Empires crumbled, new nations were born, and the old order was swept away. The Austro-Hungarian, Ottoman, German, and Russian empires all fell, leading to a redrawing of borders and the creation of new states. The Treaty of Versailles, intended to bring peace, instead sowed the seeds of future conflict. It imposed harsh penalties on Germany, which many felt were unjust and overly punitive. Germany, burdened by war guilt and reparations, felt humiliated and resentful. The economic hardships and political instability that followed created fertile ground for radical ideologies to take root. The stage was set for future conflicts, for the rise of totalitarian ideologies, and for another, even more devastating world war. The discontent in Germany, Italy, and other nations led to the rise of leaders who promised to restore national pride and power. World War I was a tragedy on an unprecedented scale. Millions of lives were lost, and countless others were forever altered by the horrors of trench warfare and the new, deadly technologies of war. It was a war that was supposed to end all wars, but instead, it simply set the stage for the next one. The League of Nations was established to prevent future conflicts, but it lacked the power and authority to enforce its resolutions. And that, folks, is something we should never forget. The lessons of World War I remind us of the devastating consequences of war and the importance of striving for lasting peace.